In episode 61, titled Physical Security Controls, Surveillance, Biometrics, Proximity, NFC, Door Sensors, the goal is to frame physical security as the first layer of trust that every other control depends on. If an attacker can walk up to a rack, unplug equipment, attach a rogue device, or access a console port, then many logical controls become irrelevant. The exam tests physical controls because they are foundational and because the best network architectures still fail when physical access is uncontrolled or unmonitored. Physical security is also a balancing act between protection and operations because legitimate access must remain possible for maintenance and incident response. The right approach is layered control that verifies identity, records activity, and detects anomalies rather than relying on any single mechanism. When you can explain why each control exists and where it is strong or weak, you can choose appropriate controls for different room risk levels without guessing. This episode builds the practical reasoning the exam expects, grounded in deterrence, evidence, and response. Before we continue, a quick note: this audio course is a companion to the CloudNetX books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Surveillance is best understood as deterrence plus evidence for incident reconstruction, not as a magical prevention tool. Cameras deter opportunistic behavior because people behave differently when they know they are recorded, and that deterrence alone can reduce casual tampering. More importantly, surveillance provides evidence after an event, allowing teams to reconstruct who entered, what they did, and when it happened, which is critical for investigations and for learning from incidents. Surveillance also supports accountability for vendors and visitors because it can corroborate access logs and identify tailgating or unauthorized entry. The exam expects you to recognize that cameras must be positioned correctly to be useful, because a camera that cannot capture faces, badge use, and door activity is poor evidence. Retention matters as well, because evidence that is overwritten too quickly may be gone before an incident is discovered. Surveillance is also only valuable if someone can access and review footage when needed, which ties into operational processes. When you describe surveillance as both deterrence and reconstruction support, you are aligned with how security professionals treat it in practice. Biometrics are a strong identity factor because they tie access to something the person is, but they bring privacy and fallback needs that must be planned explicitly. Biometrics can include fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, or hand geometry, and their strength is that they are difficult to share casually compared to a badge or a code. They also reduce certain misuse patterns, such as someone borrowing a credential because the physical characteristic must be present. At the same time, biometric systems raise privacy concerns because biometric data is sensitive and cannot be changed like a password if compromised. False rejects and false accepts are also operational realities, and systems must support fallback methods so legitimate staff are not locked out during emergencies or sensor failures. The exam often tests awareness that biometrics are not universally appropriate, especially if privacy, accessibility, or environmental conditions make them unreliable. A good design includes clear consent and governance, strong protection of biometric templates, and a defined fallback path that does not undermine the control. When you include privacy and fallback in your explanation, you show the maturity the exam expects. Proximity badges and near-field communication, often abbreviated as NFC, are convenient access mechanisms that enable fast entry, but they carry cloning and replay risks that must be managed. Proximity badges use short-range radio frequency methods to present a credential to a reader, and NFC uses similar short-range communication, often associated with modern cards and mobile devices. Convenience matters because doors that are hard to use get bypassed, and friction drives poor behavior, but convenience does not remove the need for risk controls. Cloning risk exists because some badge technologies can be copied if they use weak cryptography, or if identifiers can be read and replayed, enabling an attacker to create a duplicate credential. The exam expects you to recognize that badge systems vary in strength and that some implementations are far more resistant to cloning than others. Even strong cards can be undermined by poor processes, such as shared badges or unattended cards left near readers. Proximity and NFC systems also rely on access control databases and reader integrity, which means the system must be monitored and maintained. When you describe these credentials as convenient but clonable if poorly implemented, you show the correct risk-based perspective. Door sensors provide monitoring for open, forced, and propped conditions, which is essential because doors are the physical boundary that controls depend on. A door sensor can indicate whether a door is closed, opened normally, held open too long, or forced without authorization, allowing security teams to detect bypass attempts. Propped door detection matters because many breaches occur not through lockpicking, but through simple procedural lapses like holding a door open for convenience. Forced entry detection matters because it gives early warning, enabling response before equipment is accessed or removed. Sensors also support auditability because they can correlate with access logs to confirm that a door opened after a valid credential presentation rather than under unknown conditions. The exam often tests whether you treat sensors as part of a detection and response system rather than as a passive hardware feature. Sensors are only valuable if alarms are monitored and if response procedures exist, because otherwise they become noise. Door sensors also help detect tailgating indirectly by showing that a door stayed open longer than expected or opened without a corresponding badge event. When you think of sensors as anomaly detectors, you understand their real value. Layered controls are the correct strategy because physical security is not a single door lock, but a sequence of boundaries from perimeter to entry to equipment to consoles. Perimeter controls might include fencing, exterior cameras, and controlled building access that reduces the chance of unauthorized persons even reaching sensitive areas. Entry controls include secure doors, badge readers, biometrics where appropriate, and interlocks that enforce one person per authorization. Rack controls include locking cabinets, tamper-evident seals, and restricted access to critical racks within a room, recognizing that not every person with room access needs access to every device. Console access controls include locking console ports, controlling console servers, and ensuring that local access interfaces are protected from casual attachment of rogue devices. The exam expects you to understand that the deeper the layer, the narrower the access should become, reflecting least privilege in physical form. Layering also provides defense in depth because if one control fails, another can still limit damage and provide detection. It also supports operational needs because different roles may need different levels of access, and layers allow that differentiation. When you describe layered controls across perimeter, room, rack, and console, you demonstrate architecture-level thinking about physical trust boundaries. Visitor processes are where physical controls either hold up or collapse because visitors, vendors, and contractors often need access without being part of the daily credential ecosystem. Escorting is a key control because it ensures visitors are supervised and prevents wandering into unauthorized areas. Logging is critical because you must know who entered, for what purpose, and for how long, enabling accountability and post-event review. Temporary credential management matters because issuing a temporary badge is safer than sharing a permanent credential, but it must be issued with strict scope and duration, then revoked reliably. The exam expects you to recognize that visitor access is a common attack vector, whether through social engineering, impersonation, or simple opportunism. Processes should include identity verification, pre-approval, and clear rules about photography, device connection, and what areas are off-limits. Visitor logs should be reconciled, and badges should be collected to prevent reuse. When visitor management is disciplined, it complements technical controls rather than bypassing them. In physical security, process is often the difference between a secure system and a theater system. A scenario securing a main distribution frame, often called an MDF, illustrates how physical controls scale with impact, because an MDF contains high-impact equipment that can affect an entire building or campus. In this scenario, the room should have strong entry controls, such as controlled building access, a secure door with badge reader, and potentially biometrics, depending on risk and policy. Surveillance should cover the door, the interior space, and the critical racks, capturing both entry events and actions near high-value equipment. Door sensors should alert on forced entry and propped conditions, and those alerts should route to a monitored channel with clear response procedures. Rack locks should protect the most critical devices so that even authorized room access does not automatically grant access to every device. Console access should be controlled so that someone cannot plug into a console port and gain privileged access without leaving a trace. The exam expects you to align the control strength with the room's impact, and an MDF is typically a high-risk room because it is a single point of failure for many services. When you can describe layered controls for an MDF, you demonstrate the ability to design physical security proportionate to risk. A major pitfall is shared badges and tailgating, because these behaviors undermine almost every technical control by breaking the link between identity and entry. Shared badges eliminate accountability because access logs no longer represent who actually entered, and they enable unauthorized access through simple borrowing. Tailgating allows someone to enter behind an authorized person without presenting credentials, which defeats badge and biometric controls entirely. The exam tests this because the best hardware cannot compensate for weak behavior and weak enforcement. Preventing tailgating requires both physical design, such as man-traps and turnstiles in high-risk areas, and cultural enforcement, where staff are trained to challenge unknown persons. Shared badges are prevented through policy, auditing, and designing systems that make sharing inconvenient and detectable, such as requiring personal identification and enforcing strict credential issuance. The key is that physical security controls must preserve identity integrity, meaning the system must be able to trust that recorded access corresponds to the person who entered. When identity integrity is lost, investigation and deterrence both weaken dramatically. Recognizing this pitfall helps you emphasize process and culture alongside technology. Another pitfall is unmonitored alarms that create noise and cause real events to be missed, which is a classic failure of detection systems. If door sensors trigger frequently for benign reasons and no one responds, staff learn to ignore the alerts and the system becomes background noise. Attackers benefit because they can trigger or exploit alarms knowing response is unlikely and legitimate incidents can go unnoticed. The exam expects you to recognize that alerting must be actionable, meaning alarms must be routed to a monitored channel and must have response procedures that are actually followed. Tuning alarms is part of this, because thresholds and conditions should minimize false positives while still detecting real security issues. Maintenance is also required because misaligned sensors, faulty readers, or misconfigured access control rules can generate constant noise. A good design includes periodic review of alarm logs to identify recurring false triggers and correct their causes. When alarms are credible, they support fast response and deter misuse because people know anomalies will be noticed. Unmonitored alarms are not just ineffective, they can create a dangerous illusion of security. Quick wins include improving camera placement, setting a clear retention policy, and conducting access reviews regularly so the physical security system remains effective over time. Camera placement should ensure that entry points are covered clearly, including views that capture faces and badge interactions rather than only broad room shots. Retention policy should be long enough to support investigations, recognizing that incidents are often discovered days or weeks after they occur. Access reviews ensure that only current authorized personnel retain access, and that role changes, terminations, and contractor completions result in timely revocation. Reviews also help detect anomalies, such as accounts that no longer have a business reason for access or access granted too broadly across rooms. The exam often rewards answers that include these life cycle practices because they show that security is maintained, not just installed. These steps also reduce operational blind spots because they keep evidence available and access rights aligned with reality. When you combine camera quality, evidence retention, and access review, you strengthen deterrence, accountability, and incident response simultaneously. A useful memory anchor is verify identity, log entry, alert anomalies, because it captures the essential functions physical controls must provide. Verify identity means the system must reliably confirm who is requesting access, whether through badges, biometrics, or multi-factor combinations. Log entry means every access event must be recorded in a way that supports accountability and later reconstruction, including visitor logs and access control logs. Alert anomalies means abnormal conditions such as forced doors, propped doors, unusual access times, or repeated denied attempts should generate actionable alerts. This anchor helps you evaluate a control set quickly because if any of the three is missing, the physical security posture is incomplete. It also maps directly to exam reasoning, which often presents partial control sets and asks what is missing or most important. When you can explain how identity verification, logging, and anomaly alerting work together, you demonstrate a complete security model. Physical security is not just barriers, it is also evidence and response. To apply the concept, imagine choosing controls for low, medium, and high-risk rooms based on impact and threat level. A low-risk room might require basic access control, such as a keyed lock or badge reader, and basic surveillance coverage, focusing on deterring casual access. A medium-risk room might add stronger credential controls, better camera coverage, door sensors with monitored alarms, and stricter visitor processes to maintain accountability. A high-risk room, such as an MDF, would typically require layered controls, including controlled building entry, strong identity verification, possibly including biometrics, interior surveillance, door sensors with immediate response, rack-level locks, and controlled console access. In all cases, visitor management and access reviews must scale with risk because process failures can bypass technology. The exam expects you to align control strength with risk rather than applying the same control to every room. It also expects you to consider operational practicality because controls that are too burdensome may be bypassed, while controls that are too weak invite misuse. When you can justify why a room is low, medium, or high risk, and what controls match that risk, you show the design thinking being tested. To close episode 61, titled Physical Security Controls, Surveillance, Biometrics, Proximity, NFC, Door Sensors, the core idea is that physical security establishes the first layer of trust that protects network and compute infrastructure from direct tampering. Surveillance provides deterrence and evidence. Biometrics provides strong identity with privacy and fallback considerations. And proximity badges and NFC provide convenient access with cloning risk that must be managed. Door sensors detect open, forced, and propped conditions and are valuable only when alarms are monitored and response procedures exist. Layered controls across perimeter, room entry, rack, and console access reduce blast radius and enforce least privilege in physical form, while visitor processes ensure temporary access does not become a permanent bypass. The major behavioral risks are shared badges and tailgating, and the major operational risk is alert fatigue from unmonitored alarms. Quick wins such as improved camera placement, appropriate retention policy, and regular access reviews keep physical security effective over time. Your rehearsal assignment is an access audit rehearsal where you narrate who should have access to one critical room, how that access is verified, where it is logged, and what anomalies should trigger an alert, because that narration is how you demonstrate physical security control layering the way the exam expects. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.